Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's increment of our Mastering the Chaos in Project Management. Today, we are going to speak about a very, very important leadership skill, which is the skill of project storytelling. As we all know, and as we have previously discussed, that project management is more or less management of meetings, either as chairman of meetings or as an attendee of meetings. And we have also discussed many times that project leadership is 70% of the duties of project manager. And when we speak about leadership, we purposefully mean, when we speak about project leadership, we purposefully mean communication and influencing. And as we also all know that storytelling and stories are one of, if it's not the most powerful influencing tool. So, like we always say when we speak about our project management methodology and the justification of the investment of a huge project management infrastructure, we are speaking of mega projects with an assumption of minimum 200 people from many countries, takes at least 1 year, has never been done before in the organization, and has a budget of $10 million or more. Of course, this definition is a very old definition. So when we speak about a $10 million budget today, it's a very, very small budget. And if this is updated, then we are speaking of a project of minimum $50 to $100 million before we consider applying the entire PMI project management methodology. So from the novel 1984 by George Orwell, he states a very, very, very important observation, which is who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. It is a political fiction, and what he meant here is whoever controls the stories of what's going on at the present writes what happened in the past. And whatever people think happened in the past will control the future of nations. And of course, we have all witnessed maybe all conflicts, armed conflicts around the world are based on some kind of a historical story. So stories are very, very powerful in life, and they are not just for pastime. And when it comes to project management, the project manager has to control the narrative, because controlling the narrative means controlling the project. And as we progress through our presentation today, we are going to consider some examples of how a project narrative can either make or break a project, and of course a project manager as well. It's also very, very important to bear in mind as a project manager that stories spread, stories multiply, stories die, or even result in generating new stories. And we must also know that the reproduction and mutation of stories is a non-linear phenomenon. Am I being heard clearly, or is my voice low? Can you hear me clearly, please? Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me, please? No? Okay. So what we have to start discussing to understand the relevance of project stories to project success is, first of all, we have to deconstruct the illusion of project success. Traditionally, when we speak about project success, we are speaking about meeting the triple constraints of time, cost, and scope. However, when we try to recover a project, so a project is not succeeding, and now we are considering to recover this project to become successful, what we do fast tracking. And in fast tracking, we are going to spend more money. So cost is no longer a constraint. So we are not going to meet this constraint, but we are going to do it intentionally to make a project succeed. How about cost crashing? Cost crashing also will require expenditure of money. So again, when we use cost crashing, we are not respecting the constraint of cost. Also, we might reduce scope. Again, when we reduce scope, then we are not respecting the constraint of scope. We could reduce quality. And what we mean by reduction, so again, the constraint of time is not respected. Therefore, we cannot really consider of project success in terms of cost, scope, and time any longer. And of course, we can outsource and we can kill the project. So let's again take another quick look at project recovery techniques, like we said, cost crashing and fast tracking. And we can also redefine the scope, which means we use less features and we control changes. And we can do replanning of the project by less testing, lower grade materials, cheaper resources, use available resources, replace suppliers, renegotiate subcontractors. And of course, we need to replan risk, reassign management resources. So in our classical classical understanding of project success and failure, the rigid view of a project will succeed based on meeting the time, cost, and scope is no longer valid. So how can we decide when a project is successful or when a project is failure? This is where we really have to pay attention to understand the importance of controlling the project narrative throughout the life cycle of any project. And finally, on this idea, when we come to speak about agile project management, which is our latest addition to project management techniques, we say we have to fix cost and time. So cost and time has to be fixed, but we can variate functionality, so we can have less features. So here we have new constraints, which is cost, time, and quality, but we can always reduce scope. But we have to maintain functionality. So we have to always go back to the drawing table and redesign how to respond to a certain question, to choose the path of minimum resistance in realizing the required functionality to solve a certain problem. So what is our alternative, a true alternative to project recovery in the light of the information that we have just discussed and revealed? So we have to re-narrate the project story. So what we are going to discuss today, we are going to discuss about how to control the project narration throughout the project life cycle, but we also have to appreciate that the very same skill can be used to recover and transform a failed project into a successful project by just changing the story around the project. So controlling the project stories is a very, very important project management skill, particularly when we are speaking of mega projects, because mega projects by nature are very complex endeavors, and as so they will encounter problems, they will have cost overruns, they will not meet schedule, and they will have huge scope changes. So also a point in time to just stress here, as harsh as it is, loser project managers will play the blame game. Like I've mentioned, a project manager will always defend his project in meeting rooms. So if a project manager goes into meeting rooms simply with the tool of pointing fingers to others and saying it's not my fault, it's X, Y, Z fault, this project manager will be considered as a bad project manager, and no matter how well he does after this and how well he recovers the project, he will never be considered as a competent project manager because he used a very wrong approach to justify a project hardship. And here, when storytelling has to kick in, the project manager has to sit down and formulate a very, very, very structured narration for what happened and what went well and what went wrong, and to circulate this story to be the only story about the project circulating in the narration in the narration in the narration atmosphere. Okay, we have two social systems when it comes to stories about projects. We have the technical system and we have the mass media system. Different systems have different laws. So in the technical domain, success equals signed contracts fulfillment. So if I meet what is in the documents, which is like we say the triple constraints, then within the technical domain my project is successful. However, the mass media domain is a little bit different, because success in the mass media domain means or equals to the narrative most favored by the people. For example, there are some projects which have been finished on time according to required quality standard, met their scope objectives and their cost objectives. So according to technical domain, they are successful. However, they were not considered successful projects, because in the mass media domain, people are saying, why do we need these projects? Why do we need these projects? These projects are useless. And of course, we all know of examples of such projects, mega projects, which are a success based on more or less success according to the triple constraints. They are very successful. They finished on time, even earlier, and maybe they cost a little bit more or a little bit less, but they were done to a very high level of quality. But still, in the mass media domain, they are not considered a success, and they have failed the test of the most favored narrative by the people test. So the strategic power of corporate storytelling. So project storytelling is a subset of corporate storytelling, and corporate storytelling is cornerstone for developing vision, communicating vision, stakeholder management and engagement, conflict management, decision making, leadership, power and influence, of course, facilitation, planning, managing uncertainty, negotiating, and of course, coaching. So let's now start to get into project plans and stories. And we have to say that projects are planned and stories are told about projects. So first of all, let's just take like 5 seconds to examine this diagram. And after that, we can move on to the next step. So we have facts and we have the truth. And even though we have facts, but we have come to learn that the truth has nothing to do with facts. So in reality, facts and truth are two different matters. And of course, we have stories. And stories are stronger than facts and are stronger than the truth. And like we see here in this figure, uh, the reflection of this object on one wall it's circle, which is true, and on the other wall it's a square, which is also true, and it's also facts and factual, but neither is the truth. So facts, truth, reality, they are all on the eyes of the beholder or from the perspective of the viewer. But what will really mold our beliefs and change our viewpoints is the stories around a certain group of facts or a certain realities. So stories decide what reality really is. So plans and stories are two different ways of communicating about projects. Plans are formalized descriptions, primarily supporting coordination. Project stories accounts whose primary function is emotional appeal. So plans are aimed at a narrow group of specialists. So when we are making project plans, we are really focusing on addressing the engineers and the direct project stakeholders. But stories are aimed at project participants as well as a broader audience. So like they refer to it, canteen and mass media. So canteen is all the people working in the project gather in the canteen. So stories are targeted for everybody in the project because everybody in the project is at the canteen, but also mass media or stakeholders outside the project. So stories and control of stories is a very, very crucial and important aspect of project management. Plans are used for controlling projects, while a story is used for interpreting it. Nobody will understand a project without a strong story surrounding this project. So when we speak here about interpreting the project, there is, like what we say, there is a project manager. Above a project manager, there is a project champion. And above the project champion, there is a project sponsor. So the project sponsor is responsible for the stories which explains why we do this project. The project champion is responsible for detailed stories about individual benefits of the project. But the project manager is responsible for internal stories related to the performance of ongoing activities and ongoing work in the project. So we have different layers. We have different layers of governance within our project. Also, according to each layer of governance within our project, we have different storytelling requirements. So here is our basic story format, which is home and abroad, and then the hero will return home. So the adventure starts with a call. He meets a mentor. He crosses his first test. He finds allies. He passes smaller tests until he's ready to meet the big test. Then he is recognized as a successful hero and he returns back home. So we call this hero journey home, abroad, home. And now what we are really going to speak about is how to structure a story, how stories are structured, and how as a project manager, after I understand how normal stories are structured, how I can transform project information and data into stories and like we said, engaging and influential stories. So first of all, we have to understand that stories are required to create emotional appeal. It has to be consistent and authentic, and it has to be clear and concise. So a very basic story structure like home, abroad, home, we have at first a setup and a first turning point. Then we have a conflict, and then we have a resolution. So if I have a story, it has to have a setup and why and how things start, an introduction, and then we have a conflict, and then how the conflict is resolved. Without conflict, people are not interested in listening or hearing what we are going to say next. So we have to state a conflict and keep our audience in anticipation to hear the resolution or how our hero has resolved the conflict. So throughout our basic story structure, we have to maintain logical cause and effect. So every step of a story, it has to have a structure of cause and effect. So Pixar, Walt Disney Pixar is very famous studio, and they have a very simple story structure, which is a situation and then a complication. The situation gets complicated, and then the complication will result in a big question, and the hero will finally find the answer to the question, and the story is finished, which is, again, if we map it against home, abroad, home, we will have situation, we have complication, we have question, then we have the qualifying test, and then abroad we will have essential test, and we will have our answer, and then our hero will return home for that glorifying test. So how does Pixar's framework really look? It's very straightforward to use. If I am a project manager, I can use this as a basic formula or a starting point for writing down any story about any situation inside my project that I want to write about. Of course, we are going to discuss more tools that I can use to customize this to be more project oriented. But for now, let's just understand how basic stories are structured. So we'll start once there was usually a protagonist with a goal. Every day describes the protagonist routine until one day something pivotal that changes everything. And then because of that cause and effect, until finally this is when the protagonist reaches the goal, but often not in the way they originally thought they would. This is called suspense and uncertainty, which makes, of course, the story even more and more interesting. And ever since then, and how the character and the situation has changed. Personally, I have worked in my early career in many companies, and the senior management always preferred a good story to good work. So if there are two employees, one who tells good stories about very lousy work, and another employee who does not know how to tell stories, but he does a very good job, the one with the good stories always moves up the ladder faster, because executive leadership really values somebody who can formulate a good story to find his way out of a tight situation. So being able to formulate stories could be equal to or even more important than doing a good job for one's own career. But also for a responsible project manager, a good story will make sure continuous support for the project from senior management is maintained. Because without a good story, a project might get cancelled. So what are the elements of a story? We have seen a very simple story structure, which is situation, complication, another one, setup, conflict resolution. But what is a full structure, story structure? So the full story structure is made up of the following elements, which are motives, conflict, actants, plot, context or background, and a message or call for action. However, our basic ingredients of a story are only three, which is conflict, actants, and a plot. Without a conflict, nobody wants to listen. So again, when I am formulating a story, I have to really make my conflict engaging. I have to really think of how to formulate an engaging conflict so that audience listen to me. So first of all, let's speak about the project plot, which is the dynamics of the actants as unfolded in the dimension of time. And here, plots happen actually in a locus. Locus means time and place. It happens at a certain place at a certain time. So there is a locus of time and place. It's not only the dimension of time, but it's place and time together. And this is why sometimes we hear it often, meanwhile, something else was happening somewhere else. So it is at the exact same time we have two different things going on, or two different plots going on, because this is happening even though they are happening at the very same instant of time, but they are taking place in different places. Or maybe we do another locus variation when we have two things happening in the past and what's happening in the present, or something happening in the future. So the conflict is embodied by the actants on the conflict axis. So now we are going to learn more about conflicts and, most importantly, conflict axis, because how to use storytelling in project management is centered around understanding what is meant by a conflict axis. So what are the different actants in a story? We have a protagonist, we have an antagonist, we have a subject, we have an object, we have a giver, we have a receiver, we have a helper, we have an observer. Also, laws and regulations can be project actants. They could be a protagonist or they could be an antagonist. So here we have a very simple axis. And here is our axis. It's invisible, but you can see it by the blue line I am creating here. And it is the axis between the subject and the object. So whenever we have a subject that needs to reach an object, he is doing this through managing or crossing a certain axis of conflict. So the actants, the subject, is somebody who's striving to reach an object. An object is a positive entity whose absence is experienced as a lack by the subject and receiver. So both subject and receiver perceive the absence of the object as a lack, but only the subject strives for it. An antagonist destroys knowledge and ability of project. A helper confers knowledge and ability to project. The giver has a sovereign right to possess the object. observer normally cannot observe the real project, but must be satisfied with various representation of it. And as a project manager, I try to use engaging stories so that every observer becomes a helper or a receiver or a subject helping me, instead of me as a project manager being the subject or the only subject of the project who is striving to obtain the object. So it's very, very important for a project manager to really appreciate and understand the sharing of responsibility and the sharing of reward with others, because it inherently provides sharing of project risk and project risk to project reputation, as well as it protects the reputation of the project manager himself. The conflict. A conflict can exist in the individual mind or between one or more actants. The individual protagonist desires something but is forbidden or unable to fulfill the desire. So this is one form of conflict. The protagonist is trying, or the protagonist or the subject is trying to obtain the object, but he cannot. So this is one form of conflict. Also, two actants desire to possess the same object. So two people are competing for the same object. So the conflicts in classical literature and fiction have got 36 dramatic situations, which is like crimes of love, obstacles to love, the enigma, abduction, revolt, 36 dramatic situations. But in reality, all of them must have a conflict, which is a contradiction between four modalities and their relations to the actual world. And the modalities are 4+1, which are obligations, knowledge, intentions, and desires, plus number 5, which is abilities. And as shown here, the four modal worlds versus actual world. We have intentions, and we can have conflicts of intentions related to competitions or conflict between an actor's ambition and incapability. And we also can have conflicts of desires like jealousy, or conflict between desires and obligations. And in the world of obligations, we can have desires versus obligations. We can have broken promises, and we can have violated interdictions. Also, there are certain stigmas like religion, sex, and aristocracy. And we have the conflicts related to the modal world of knowledge, which is mistaken interpretation, double and single deception. A very, very classical movie called Diabolique has been done through the years, like maybe 6 or 10 times. The same movie has been repeated by different actors. It's a very good movie about double deception and mystery. And number 5, abilities, which is unsuccessful action. So an event is tellable. Something happens and it really deserves to be told if in a system of reality there is a discrepancy between the actual world and a possible world, and internally between possible worlds. So an event is tellable if it has a conflict, because if it does not have a conflict, nobody is interested in listening. Everybody's listening to stories just to understand how a certain, we love to learn. Our human brains are wired in a way that we like to gain useful information. So useful information happens when there is a certain conflict told to me, and how to resolve this conflict is going to be told to me. So I am sitting in anticipation and waiting to hear how it was resolved. So I am listening to the story. So what kind of conflicts? We can have desires versus obligations. We can have unsuccessful action. We can have broken promises. We can have violated restrictions. We can have mistaken interpretations or double and single deception. In marketing and sales is a field that really requires stories. And of course, we know that part of a project manager in the field of product development, a project manager in the field of product development involves some marketing and sales. So the stories here, they have to address the prospect's problem, and the stories have to address the prospect's needs, and they have to respect the stage the prospect is in within the buyer's journey. So what's a plot? Plots are built on contrary terms: life and death, truth and lies, culture and nature, etc. So there is always a conflict, a bigger conflict than the smaller conflict we discussed earlier is the story plot. So it is the dynamics of a story. It connects the events and episodes to a causal, temporal, and intentional pattern. So when we have the stages to a hero's journey, the hero will have many conflicts, smaller conflicts along the journey. But the journey itself is a major conflict, which is called the plot. And it starts with exposition, which is beginning of the story where characters and setting are introduced. And then we have rising action, where the main character faces a series of conflicts. Then the climax, the most exciting part of the story, when we learn the outcome, and then events leading to the end of the story and resolution, which is here events unfolding. Action is meeting the biggest challenge in the story and the resolution of the biggest challenge. And the biggest challenge of the story starts here at the exposition. So here at the exposition stage, we start our big event, but we address it at the end of the story when we have falling action, and then we reach the resolution of the exposition and the end of our story. And like we said at the beginning, it's home, abroad, home structure. And the plot introduces temporal, causal, and intentional relations into the story. The home, abroad, home plot, the hero starts in one of the terms and moves over to the contrary through negation of the first. So, for example, the hero starts as afraid and then he becomes courageous. For example, this is part of the plot and the changes that happen to a hero in our classical storytelling. We are still in the domain of classical storytelling, and soon we will move to project storytelling, but we cannot do one before we understand the first. So each movement is marked with a specific test: the qualifying test, the essential test, the clarifying test. And we have these tests in project storytelling. So we have to address these now. So when we go to project storytelling, we understand those. The qualifying test proves the hero is worth to be a subject. The essential test, once the hero arrives at the contrary term, he must pass the essential test by obtaining the object. The glorifying test, which is the last test, it takes place when the hero returns to his point of departure and become recognized as a true hero. So here we have the 12 stages of a hero journey. Just to go quickly. Now we have context, and when we speak about context, we are going to have the project axis or the conflict axis, and then we have a communication axis, and we have a axis of conflict. So what's our project axis? Our project axis is the axis that has got the object and subject in it. And we have a communication axis which has got a sender and receiver on it. And then we have a conflict axis, which is a relation between helper, subject, and opponent. So here we have our conflict axis, which runs like this, which is between the subject and the object, and we refer to this as the project axis, because our project, the objective of our project is that the subject, who is our project team and project management, basically, when we start off, needs to obtain a certain object, and then they have a sender. A sender is somebody who's sponsoring the project, paying for it. So here, if I am a contracting company, I am the subject, and I need to build a hospital, for example, which is an object, and the sender is some charity who are paying for the object, and the receiver is some rural community, for example. And then we have helpers, people who are helping the contractor to achieve his role, for example, local authorities. And the subject could be maybe competition, private provider of health care, for example. They are opponents and opposing the project. But basically, we have here the subject, which is the contracting company trying to build the project, traveling down a project axis to fulfill an object, which is our hospital. Okay, so how do I change project plans into project stories? This is our $1 million question, and why we are here today in this presentation. So project plans cannot be converted into an arbitrary narrative, since project plans and narratives can be compared, and lies and contradictions can be detected. In some sense, the stories must be true. So my stories about my project has to be true, and they have to be based on facts. So where do I get the source of facts for constructing my stories? I have the project objectives, and I have the project resources, and I have the project plans, and I can use them to build the stories. I also have a very strong tool which I have to use for everything. The 5M, or the fishbone diagram, or the Ishikawa diagram, is a brainstorming tool, is a brain organizing tool. It's a tool to be used everywhere for everything that has management or leadership in its context. So I also use the 5M to map all the project information that I have in order to see the problem I want to formulate a story about in a visual manner before I start to build the narration of the story that I intend to build. So I will use the project objectives, I will use the project resources, I will use the project plans. I will map all the information I have on a fishbone diagram using the 5M methods, and then I will use the resulting diagram to formulate my story. So technical roles. So here I have technical roles like engineers. I use those to be narrative roles. They are telling the story. And baseline tests, baselines, which is the baselines on my plan, my project plan, the dates, the due dates, and of course the cost, the total cost of the project, our baseline, they are equal to tests. So the qualifying test is the proof that the subject is worthy, corresponds to pre-qualifications found in procurement procedure. So when I have made pre-qualifications for my vendors and subcontractors, this in my story, I will use this information as the qualifying test. So when I'm telling the story, I know that I need to have some qualifying tests. So this is where I will find my qualifying test in the pre-qualifications of subcontractors and vendors. What about the essential test? The essential test is the proof that the object is obtained, corresponds to achievement of milestones and handover of deliverables. This is an indication that the project is moving ahead. So I will formulate my milestones achievement as a conflict and a challenge which the project has overcome to move forward. And the glorifying test corresponds to passing final acceptance testing and approval of results by shareholders. And the call is an event before the qualifying test. In a fairy tale, this is when the subject is informed of the task or purpose of the project. So here the call, which is an introduction of why we are undertaking this project. And it has been, this is very important piece of information was overlooked by PMI in the previous versions, which is the project justification. And then when Prince 2 came around and it became one of the fundamental rules of Prince 2 is the continuous project justification. So the call is very important because the call is the project justification, and without continuous project justification, the project might not be any longer needed, but it's still continuing because somebody has overlooked to make sure that the project is still needed and the justification of the project is still valid. So the call is very important in a project story because it captures the ongoing project justification. So what about stories are embedded in other stories? Objects of subordinate stories are objectives. Objects of superordinate stories are purposes. So when I am formulating a project story for a long project which has got a superordinate story plus subordinate stories, then I have to understand that objects of subordinate stories are just smaller project objectives. Like I said, the project objectives could be the responsibility of the project champion, and the object of superordinate stories is the purpose. And like I said, for the bigger pictures of the project, the purpose of the project and the stories related to the purpose of the project are the responsibility of the project sponsor. But of course, if I am a good project manager and I work in an organization that is not so proficient and I am very good at storytelling, so it will become very good for my career and for my project if I formulate stories for my superiors who are the project sponsor and project champion, because they will also use these stories to get support for the project. So I can also help my superiors in formulating their stories, but I have to understand that my responsibility of stories are confined within my project management responsibilities. And I have to understand there are subordinate stories and superordinate stories all the time. Okay, so what are classical conflicts we can use in project management? We can have man against nature. We can have man against technology. And in the cost and risk and conflict axis could cancel the project. So if I use as a purpose or as a conflict axis for my story cost, seniors will panic and will cancel the project. And if I use risk, they will cancel the project, or maybe, of course, cancel the project. So I have to change it. I have to change. I have to avoid at any time to formulating, or if somebody else is circulating stories about my project that are involving cost and risk, I have to formulate better stories which will transform the conflict of the project to become man against nature or man against technology. And I have to always understand that influential stakeholders could stop the project, and good stories will keep my project ongoing. So we have a classical example of building a school for the Ministry of Education in a rural area. So I have observer number one is local officials and authorities. Observer number two, students and parents. We have subject, which is Ministry of Education, and we have object, which is the school, and the receiver are the population of the rural area, or maybe the rural area authority. So I have to do what is known as role shifting stories. So in order to change my story from being a story of cost and risk to a story of man against nature and man against technology, I have to use what is known as role shifting stories. So I have to shift the observer to become a helper. And I have to shift other observers to become a subject. And the subject becomes a helper. So now I was the contractor and I am supposed to provide the object. Now I change myself as only a helper. I'm only helping the subject, which used to be an observer. I made him the subject who needs the object, and I am only helping. And this is what I meant by sharing risk, to share the reward and to share the responsibility inside my story. And then we have the object, and I change the object to helper, and the receiver, I change it to subject. And for example, observer number one was local officials. So instead, I will put in my story the local officials to become helpers. Observer number two used to be students and parents. I will make the students and parents are the subject. Students and parents need the school and they want to have their school. And the Ministry of Education, which used to be the subject, I made it the helper. And the Ministry of Education is going to help the parents to achieve the school they want. So I moved the risk of, if the project fails, it's going to be the subject who failed, which is the students and parents. They failed, but not the Ministry of Education who failed, because the Ministry of Education is a helper now. It's only helping the students and parents to have a school in their rural area. This shift, this small shift in the details of the story will significantly maintain the integrity of the party I am trying to protect with my stories. And then the object, which used to be a school, I made the school helper, and the receiver is rural data, and of course the subject will be education. So it's totally different, because if the school did not happen at all, My object is education, and I would say education happened in different ways. So it's different layers of protecting my reputation through proper articulation of my project narration. Here's another example where we have giver and object and receiver and helper and subject and antagonist, and then we just start to switch the roles so we can have a better protection of the reputation of different parties. Again, it's very important to kill stories, bad stories about my project if I need, because I always have to disclose everything about my project. I have to disclose it. So as a project manager, I cannot bury things under the carpet as a project manager. It's never wise way to manage projects. So to kill a story, announce it during where many fit stories compete for attention, which what we refer to choose a good day to bury bad news. So how do I bury bad news? By telling it. But I choose a day where it is competing with other more important stories for attention. Here are some stories. There are mini stories. They have all the elements, but in a very short phrase. They are written in Arabic, so I'll just go on and translate them. For example, the first one says, all this effort is for our country. It's a small story. We have it displayed in tabloids all around major projects built by the government. But it tells a story. It tells a story of how this magnificent project involved huge efforts and that we are doing it for our country. And also we have one hand bears arms and another hand builds. Now we have a third example, which was 100 million tons of concrete in love of our country. All these examples are examples of stories from real projects, and they are displayed to rally the support of the public and to rally the approval of the public for a certain project. Another example of using narratology in support of projects, for example, it's also in Arabic, I'm very sorry. Here we have like a statement, we have roads and we have a certain road and we are doing some repairs to the road. So we have a sign that says, sorry for the inconvenience, road repair works are ongoing. But this is not very engaging and this is not very is not much in favor of supporting rally to whatever project we are doing. But we can use road, instead of road repair, we can say road improvement is ongoing. Or we can say together for the road improvement. Now we have also made our population, which were on the other side of the fence, together with us for the road improvement. Also, we can have together for a better road. And we can have the same story, together for a better life. So it used to be sorry for repairing the road. Now it's together for a better life. It's the same story of the same repair work of the same road, but how we phrase it differently will change the reality of the story, will change how it's perceived in the minds of the audience. And finally, of course, together for a better future for our children. So it's just a repair of the work, but the sign, instead of saying sorry for disturbing you, it says together for a better future of our children. So this is the power of storytelling and narratology. We have a few tricks of the trade when we are formulating stories about projects. We will introduce acceptance threshold. So I will have a percentage. I will have the acceptance criteria of my project as a percentage. It's not like a 0 and 1, a success and failure, because it becomes very critical and very black and white and I can easily be in the failure or of course in the success. But when it's a threshold, it's a percentage. I have made it's no longer black and white. It's just a gray area. So however I want to see the gray area. If I want to see it as a success, I can see it as a success. If I want to see it as a failure, I can see it as a failure. But this is very important. Risk management of my storytelling is to introduce an acceptance threshold for my milestones. So I have to have the clear description of the goals, and then I play down the discussion of costs and risks. So like they say, sell the benefit, not the use. This is a technical term in sales and marketing. So here's the same. I am selling the project goal and the project objectives. I speak about them plenty and loudly. And when I speak about costs and risks, I just speak less and with a lower tone. So also I have to understand the role shift of project actants. Like we moved the Ministry of Education from being the subject of the project to a helper. So I have removed it from the line of fire. So the role shift of project actants is another way of articulating good project stories while controlling the risks around the project. Shift between objects into objectives and purposes. Of course, narratives need to be retold in order to keep alive. This is very important. This is extremely important. Even in strategic management, we say, for example, to the senior leadership of a company, we have to have like a very concise, like 2-sentence or up to 5 sentences, for example, story that that rephrases the entire or the objectives of the strategic initiatives, and that this senior leader has to always tell the story. Whenever he meets any co-worker, he has to tell him the story. Every day, every hour, every 5 minutes, he has to keep repeating the story, because this is how the story sticks. And when the story sticks, the strategy will begin to realize. So repeating the story, repeating the same story, keeping the story alive is very, very, very important in the management of the narratology or the narrations around a certain project. Avoid subjects failing to reach the object. So when you put the story, the real subject we are protecting, we can never put a story about a failing subject, because a failing subject is a fallen hero. And nobody wants to hear about a fallen hero or wants to support a fallen hero. Sell the benefits, not the use of technology. So like we said here, you just have to speak about the benefits, but not the use. So it becomes more relatable to the receiver. Argue receiver's context. The receiver, whoever is going to benefit from the project, you argue how this is going to change his life. Catalysts and other stories determine the context. Context determines interpretation. So the context, like we said, it has to do with which axes we are using, which one is the project axis, which one is the communication axis, and which one is the conflict axis. So the context determines interpretation. So I have to choose my axes while drafting a story very, very wisely. Recounting the call is a convenient way to tell the observers about the purpose of the project. Also, recounting the call, like we've mentioned, and according to Prince 2, this is reinforcement of the continuous project justification. Counter conspiracy theories before they parasite on the story. So again, uh, conspiracy theory will happen to the stories in the project, but don't allow it to grow and always have more stories in support of the original story. Select genre, clearly define actants, particularly subjects and receivers. Include progressing essential tests within the plot. So essential test should not be a single test, it should be a progressive progression of tests. The message to observers must be clear and cannot be mistaken. So I have a few examples. Objects of subordinate stories are objectives. Objects of superordinate stories are purposes and goals. Defending inevitable budget overruns in a computer-based patient record system is a lost cause. A better strategy is to point to the improved procedures in the hospital and the many extra patients that got their operation. Risks conflict, censorship, use man against nature conflict. And a final thought from Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu says, if we do not wish to fight, we can prevent the enemy from engaging us, even though the lines of our encampment be merely traced out on the ground. All we need to do is to throw something odd and unaccountable in his way. So a story, a well-formulated story, and this is, I think, called propaganda warfare, will make the enemy unwilling to fight. So stories are even part of our military interactions. And where to find ideas, these are places for people who are keen in discovering more about storytelling in general. And I thank you very much and would very much welcome your questions now, please.
Dr. Akram,
Yes,
do you hear
sir.
me? Do you hear me?
Yes, sir, I hear you very well.
I I would like to thank you very much for your giving me the chance to join you in your very interesting lecture today. You have
It's all.
reviewed you have reviewed the start of the art and introduced the invention and innovation and development in project management. You started with definitions, leadership skill, project manager, minimum number of person, إلى آخره money, political fiction, past, present, future, quality, time constraint, project. The most important, you have discussed in details the application in developed and underdeveloped countries, especially at the end in rural areas. You touch social systems applied to measure project planning and so on. I don't want to say more than I've enjoyed very much your lecture. You have added to me much, so I should appreciate very much your effort, your research paper. I think it is high time to publish it in series of lectures that will add to project management. Once again, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Akram. Wishing you all the best and to go in this direction and keep high. Thank you very much, Dr. Akram. Thank you.
The highly esteemed Dr. Mustafa Sha'ban, it's always a privilege and an honor having you, and always your presence enriches every forum you attend. And we will always, personally, myself and my colleagues, will remain your humble students and will always learn from you. Uh, among other things, the professionality and the ability to conclude and the ability to rephrase and to summarize, as you have, of course, resided over and chaired like prestigious high-end uh, conferences, conferences, and it's really an honor and a pleasure having you today, Professor Dr. Mustafa Shaban.
Uh, thanks to you, Dr. Akram. Many thanks,
Thank you,
many
sir.
thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So, by this, we conclude our presentation for today. I thank you all for your attendance, and I really hope you found it interesting. And I would welcome your questions at any time through our communication system at South Europe College. Thank you very much and have a very pleasant rest of your evening and wish you good night.
Thanks very much and good night.